Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 13th of March 2023. The articles that we shall be taking up today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion. So the first article for discussion that we have taken is very important. Same-sex union can rock societal values. So the center, in an affidavit to the Supreme Court, has frowned upon same-sex marriage while invoking the accepted view within courts that a marriage between a biological man and a biological woman is a holy union, a sacrament and a sanskar in India. Now, as we already know that Supreme Court has decided to examine the petitions to allow solemnization of same-sex marriage under the Special Marriage Act, which provides a civil form of marriage for couples who cannot marry under their personal laws. And so currently, people who have same sex cannot marry under any of the religious personal laws that exist in our country. And so the only recourse they have is a Special Marriage Act. Just like when people belonging to different religion have to marry, they can only marry it through a Special Marriage Act. And so a lot of petitions were filed in the Supreme Court to allow them to marry under Special Marriage Act, against which the union government stands now in its affidavit. And the main contention has been Article 14, which provides for equality before the law, but also provides for equal protection of the law, which provides for reasonable classification, which is basically categorizing people into different groups and treating them differently. And so the argument of the government is that marriage between biological male and biological female is different from a marriage between a biological male and biological female, and hence these people cannot claim equality in demanding the marriage rights in our country as compared to the male and female. And this is what is known as the concept of intelligible differentia. There is a differentiation between these two forms of union. And since these two forms of union are different, they have to be treated differently, and that is what equal protection of the law is. Because after all, equal protection of the law means that all persons in similar circumstances shall be given the same rights and liability. And so it essentially means that equals are to be treated equally and there must be no discrimination amongst them. And since these two kinds of unions are not equal, that is what the argument of the government is. But as of now, the Supreme Court has referred this matter to higher judge bench. But nonetheless, it calls into question the rights and the issues being faced by the LGBTQ community in our country. And so first we are going to look at the challenges they are facing right now, and then what are the important Supreme Court judgments in this regard. So when we talk about the issues related to LGBTQ community, the issues can be segregated into 5 main headings. Lack of data and basic research, which is a basic problem. Marginalization and social exclusion related to stereotype and stigma, educational exclusion, economic deprivation, and finally the legal injustice or lack of justice to the LGBT community. So when we talk about lack of data and basic research, this is a fundamental problem in dealing with most of the vulnerable sections. Because if you do not have the proper data and if you do not have research and statistics about this population belonging to LGBTQ community, how are you even going to formulate a policy? And finding empirical data on, let's say, economic, health, family, and other outcomes of LGBTQ people is complicated by several challenges. For example, most of the surveys related to economy or health do not include questions about sexual orientation. So if you fill up the forms, the questions are always about the gender with which a person identifies and not the orientation or the sexual preferences of that particular person. Apart from that, stigma and fear of discrimination might always reduce the willingness of LGBTQ people to correctly report their sexual orientation or gender identity on surveys. So if you combine these two factors, they ultimately lead to the lack of data and hence deter the basic research. For example, in 2011 Indian census, which marked the first time that an other category was added to the male and female options on the question about sex, And this is a very, very important information from the perspective of prelims examination. 2011 Indian census marked the first time that an other category was added to the male and female options. And in essence, it provided a third gender category. But the result count of transgender people is thought by some observer to be unreliable. A total of 4,90,000 individuals of all ages reported the other option, or about just 0.04% of the Indian population of around 1.2 billion people. Can you believe it? In fact, many observers believe that figure to be an undercount or understatement given the unfamiliarity of the option. Concerns about the quality of answers quoted by enumerators and the likely underreporting by transgender people worried about revealing a stigmatized status to the government are some of the factors which might have resulted into this underreporting. So just 4.9 lakh people in India have come out as the transgenders, which is a way below as compared to the developed countries. And so it is a challenge to frame appropriate policies for the LGBTQ communities without the reliable and adequate data. As we have understood, because of the stigma attached to the sexual orientation, the LGBTQ people are relegated to the margins of society. This marginalization often excludes them from accessing basic services like education, like health, like housing, and even accessing the legal justice system. And so all these are basically out of the purview of a transgender or a person belonging to LGBTQ community in general. This marginalization and social exclusion often reflects itself in the form of exclusion from the educational network and educational system in India also. Because when you come out as an LGBTQ person, the harassment and violence by teachers and classmates and colleagues is very common. And that treatment reduces their ability to continue with their education. Apart from that, resources for investment in training or education by families might also be diminished for children who are gender non-conforming, which basically means that people who do not conform to the biological sex at birth, which is either male or female, they are known as people of gender non-conforming. Then if you're excluded and marginalized from society, and if you do not get enough education, of course your chances of doing well economically are diminished, and hence the economic deprivation. There is very pervasive discrimination in hiring, which basically results from low skill acquisition while at the time of education and vocational training. And since they already have very unequal access to education, this results in wage gap also. And final nail in the coffin is the legal injustice. So you knock on the doors of judiciary and you do not get justice, or in fact, you're not able to knock on the doors of the justice also. Despite homosexuality being decriminalized in India after the Section 377 was struck down, let us know in the comment section which was that important judgment which led to the striking down of Section 377. Section 377 has been decriminalized, but the laws in India still remain hostile and prejudicial towards the LGBTQ community in several aspects of the current debate. For example, about marriage. So your marriage cannot be registered if the two people do not belong to the opposite sex. So in India right now, in order to get your marriage registered, one person has to be male, another person has to be biologically female. Apart from marriage, the problems of adoption also are strongly tilted against LGBTQ communities. Then problems of surrogacy also hinder their parenthood. So you can see that in terms of legal sphere also, the people belonging to LGBT community, once they come out as LGBTQ, are not treated equal to the straight people. Now, in this regard, two important legal judgments are worth remembering. First, of course, is the Nalsa judgment of 2014, where the Supreme Court issued a sweeping judgment which held that transgender people should be legally recognized according to their gender identity, enjoy all fundamental rights, and receive special benefits in education and employment. Whereas in case of Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India 2018 judgment, the Supreme Court decriminalized Section 377 of IPC, which basically means decriminalization of homosexuality. And that the Section 377 was violative of right to freedom of life, privacy, and equality of sexual minorities. In the same judgment, Supreme Court observed that an individual's right to develop one's individuality against the demand of social conformity must be recognized. Majority opinion does not become law of the land. Social morality cannot overshadow constitutional morality. And according to Supreme Court, Section 377 was nothing but was a weapon used to isolate, exploit, and harass communities. The next article for discussion has appeared on page number 6 as a form of column, New Reality, which talks about the recent truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this is just not like any other truce. This is a special one. This is a special one because it was brokered by China. Now, if you recall the politics of the Middle East or the Gulf region, this is the Gulf region. You can easily understand that there are a lot of axes on which the politics over here evolves. One is, of course, the traditional animosity between Israel and all other Muslim nations, and that we can call as Jew Muslim axis, which was recently resolved last to last year. Then you also have Shia Sunni axis. On one side, you have Iran heading the Shia camp and Saudi Arabia heading the Sunni camp. And because of what has happened in Yemen, because of the opposite sides both have taken in Yemen, this rivalry has just worsened in past 1 decade. Now, the fact that in this region, China is brokering a peace between two important regional players just goes on to demonstrate that China is increasing its influence in the Middle East. And this influence has reached that level that it can broker peace between the stark rivals Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, from the perspective of prelims examination, this map is very important. If you look at this map, Saudi Arabia sharing border with Yemen and Oman and UAE. On island lies Qatar and Bahrain. Then you have Kuwait in between Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and here you have Iran, which shares the border with Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as Azerbaijan and Caspian Sea towards its east and north, and then, of course, with Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Iraq. But from the perspective of mains examination, you can see that under GS paper 2 syllabus says bilateral, regional, and global groupings and agreements involving India or affecting India's interests. Now, whatever happens between Iran and Saudi Arabia does not directly impact India, but has a lot of indirect and prominent impact on India. Because this region is very, very important to us. And that is what we are going to understand first, importance of this region for India. And then we are going to understand what are the challenges for India in this region. So, starting with the basics of Persian Gulf region. The Persian Gulf includes 8 countries, as you can see on the map: Iran, Oman, UAE, that is United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Iraq, bordering the Persian Gulf. Now, Persian Gulf is very, very important region because the Gulf and its coastal areas are the world's largest single source of petroleum, which is around 50% of the world's oil reserves. Apart from that, the Persian Gulf has many fishing grounds, extensive coral reefs, mostly rocky, and abundant pearl oysters. The Persian Gulf has seen a lot of instability in past 20-30 years. It was a battlefield of 1980 to 1988 Iran-Iraq war, and then in 1991 the Gulf War, where Iraq invaded the Kuwait. Now, since this region is one of the world's richest when it comes to the mineral oil or fossil fuel, most of the countries, and especially the developed ones, have a very high stake in this particular region. But when it comes to India, we should clearly understand the importance of this region from the Indian context. And the acronym of 3E is apt to describe the importance of this region in Indian context. These 3Es are energy, economic relations, and expatriates or diaspora community, which is also a part of your syllabus. When it comes to energy security, because 53% of India's oil imports and 41% of gas imports come from this particular region. And so you can understand how important this region is from the perspective of India's energy security. Whereas when it comes to the next T, which is economic relations, the India Gulf trade in 2019-20 and 2021 was 1/5 of India's global trade. Apart from that, there are massive investments in infrastructure development flowing in from the Gulf region to our country. Then the last E in this relationship denotes expatriates or Indian people living in this region. More than around 9 million Indians reside in Gulf region, remitting around 40 to 50 billion dollar per annum. And to give you the extent of this contribution, it amounts to around 2% of India's GDP and two-thirds of the total remittances which our country receives every year. So you can understand how substantial the economic contribution of the people living in this region is to us. And so that is why it is extremely and crucially important for us to maintain the stability of this particular region. Apart from that, India has extended its strategic partnership with Iran, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. The Gulf region does not directly belongs to India's neighborhood, but it is definitely one of the most important part of India's extended neighborhood. What happens in the extended neighborhood impacts India's neighborhood and impacts India. For example, what happens in Iran not just impacts our energy security, our access to Afghanistan, but it also impacts Pakistan, which will have some kind of impact on our relationship with Pakistan as well. So now you can understand the multi-dimensional ways in which the Gulf region is very, very important for us. And so it is also important for us to understand what are the challenges which India is facing as far as relationship with the nations of this particular region is concerned. And the first and foremost challenge which India faces is about balancing the relationships. India has to maintain its relationship with Iran, but we know that US has imposed sanctions on Iran. So again, India has to balance the relationship between Iran and America all the time. Then India has to navigate the geopolitical rivalries between Saudi Arabia and Iran and Israel. And not until recently, when the Sunni states led by UAE and Saudi signed an accord with Israel, there was another challenge until 2 3 years ago, which was about balancing India's interests with Israel as compared to other Sunni countries. The increasing radicalization of the citizens of this region is a top concern for our country. Increasing incidences of terrorism, sprawling terror outfits, and probability of re-emergence of Islamic State is one of the top challenges which not only these countries are facing, but India is facing a threat of import of radicalization through its nationals residing in these regions. Then, just like each and every region in India's neighborhood and extended neighborhood, rising Chinese influence cannot be denied in this part of the world as well. With a growing Chinese presence in Iran, India is concerned about its strategic stakes such as completion of Chabahar port project. Then in past 5 to 10 years, these countries have enacted a lot of protectionist policies which have direct impact on India's diaspora. And the best example would be the Nitakat law, which makes it mandatory for the local companies to hire one Saudi national for every 10 migrant worker, and because of which there has been a widespread perception that the policy would lead to denial of job opportunities for a large number of Indians working there. Then, as we have understood how many expatriates live there and how important they are not just for their own safety and security but for India's economic growth. And with each and every crisis which emerges in this particular region, the safety and security of Indian national is also threatened. And then finally, the disruption in the Gulf region caused by the historically low oil prices and plummeting global demand are likely to have economic implications for India as well, because India receives substantial amount of remittances from this particular part of the world. But apart from that, especially after this particular agreement, the challenges for India have grown manifold. Because India's deepening strategic relation with Israel has been already a cause of concern for Iran. Iran hence plays its China and Pakistan card. Iran has also supported Pakistan's stand on Kashmir, going against India's interests. Iran is a part of China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. India has been consistently opposing China's Belt and Road Initiative. Whereas ONGC's Videsh Limited played an important role in discovering the Farzad B gas field in Iran, but Iran has not given the rights to develop the gas field to India. India has to work on to balance its ties with Iran on one hand and USA sanctions in Saudi Arabia and the US on the other. New Delhi has not formally reacted to the announcement so far. The fact that these two close partners like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran have reached have reached a deal, Beijing's influence is disquieting given India's current tensions with China. India's focus on I2U2, which consists of Israel, USA, UAE, and India, so I2 is two I's and two U's, which may have taken the spotlight away from its ties with Iran and Saudi Arabia. India has to closely watch whether Beijing takes its new role as peacemaker to other parts of the world, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict regarding which China has pitched a peace formula. China has also sought to emphasize a plan called the Global Security Initiative that describes an effort to apply Chinese solutions and wisdom to the world's biggest security challenges. The next article for discussion, Safe Harbor at Risk, has appeared on page number 6, which is a column which talks about the recently draft tabled Bill of Digital India Act 2023. And it basically specifically focuses on safe harbor, which has already been taken up in the DNS. So we are going to skip particular discussion on safe harbor. But what we are going to do instead is to understand what Digital India Act is all about. What was the need to bring Digital India Act 2023? It is important for us to do that because of various reasons. Because big tech is often gaming the system. And so you will often hear how US has accused Google of abusing monopoly in ad technology. Google was found to be unfairly blocking rival payments on Indian Store. Then there have been various instances of online safety and trust issues. So for example, lawmakers renew push to shield children from harmful online content. As US Supreme Court weighs YouTube's algorithms, litigation minefield looms. Artificial intelligence generated porn is easy to make now. For women, that's a nightmare. Then the explosion of misinformation and fake news online. All of this has been the highlighting feature of internet in past 20 years. Because internet in 2000, where the current IT Act was enacted, and internet today has transformed completely. And it basically forms the syllabus of your GS paper 3. Role of social media and social networking sites in internal security challenges, basics of cybersecurity, money laundering, and its prevention. So you can see that cybersecurity has been given as a part of its syllabus under GS Paper 3. And there have been a lot of questions, especially in 2015. Considering the threats cyberspace poses for the country, India needs a digital armed force to prevent crimes. Critically evaluate the National Cybersecurity Policy 2013, outlining the challenges perceived in its effective implementation. And when Government of India is trying to legislate, come up with a new law, it is important for us to have a complete multi-dimensional view. So the first thing that we have to understand is that internet has gone through a lot of changes in past 23 years. If you compare internet in 2000 with internet today, the differences could not be starker. Whereas in 2000, there were only 55 lakh Indians who were using the internet. Right now, there are 85 crore Indians on internet, world's largest digitally connected democracy. Whereas in 2000, you only had one type of intermediary, that were just the websites, which offered one-way communication. They were just like information boards. But right now, we have plethora of intermediaries. E-commerce websites, digital media, social media, artificial intelligence websites, OTT platforms, and gaming platforms. Whereas in 2000, internet was a space for good, allowing citizens to interact at a very, very basic level. Now, if you compare it in 2023, it has become space for criminalities and illegalities, and it is very, very difficult to keep track of so many criminals operating in various ways. You have darknet. Now 20 years ago, the harms which could have been done on internet was basically a trivial cybercrime, some issues related to cybersecurity, and some basic forms of hacking. But if you compare them to now, you have catfishing, which is basically the process of luring someone into a relationship by means of a fictional online persona, or doxing, which is basically publishing private or personal information of people online to be available for sale, cyber stalking, cyber trolling, gaslighting, and phishing, which is basically an attack that attempts to steal your money or identity by getting you to reveal personal information such as credit card numbers, bank information, or passwords. In 2000, internet mainly acted as a source of information and news, but now it has proliferated into hate speech, disinformation, and fake news. And this is mainly because Information Technology Act 2000 is 22 years old, and because the internet has transformed so much in last 22 years that Information Technology Act 2000 will not be able to do justice to the digital generation in our country, which was provisioned for nascent IT ecosystem in 2000 pre-digital India in the absence of modern internet-based services such as e-commerce social media platforms. Also, it has very limited mandate because it just provides legal recognition of electronic records, transactions, and electronic signatures over the electronic medium. And so, although internet devices and information technology have empowered citizens, they have also created challenges in the form of user harm, ambiguity in user rights, security, women and child safety, organized information wars, radicalization and circulation of hate speech, misinformation and fake news, unfair trade and practice. And so, the Information Technology Act provides for the current regulatory landscape of internet in India. So it provides for intermediary guidelines and digital media ethics code. It provides for certifying authorities rules. It provides for CERT or Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. Also, you can complain against all these actions to Cyber Appellate Tribunal. It provides for procedure and safeguards for blocking rules. These rules are utilized to block particular URLs of Twitter and any other social media platform like YouTube channels and Facebook post, use of electronic records and digital signatures, and reasonable security practices and SPDI rules. And so the government has come up with Digital India Act. And so the government has come up with Digital India Act, which will lay the ground for Digital Personal Data Protection Act, National Data Governance Policy, IPC amendments for cyber crimes, and Digital India Act rule. As we have discussed in the introduction, big tech is often gaming the system. US, and so if you look at some of the key headlines, US accuses Google of abusing monopoly in ad technology. The New York Times, Google found to unfairly block rival payments on Indian store. Bloomberg, big tech attacks tough European Union measures aimed at tackling its market power. Financial Times, Netflix, Meta, and other US internet companies could be forced to pay to reach users in Europe. Fortune. And so you can clearly see that the dominant market position of big tech is often abused. And so an open internet is a must, which should have choices for the consumer, competition, online diversity, fair market access, ease of doing business, and ease of compliance for startups. And so the new act is going to provide fair trade practices, prevention of concentration of market power and gatekeeping, distortions through regulation of dominant ad tech platforms, app stores, and etc., promoting Startup India via non discriminatory access to digital services and interoperable platforms. Safeguard innovation to enable emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, Web 3.0, autonomous systems, robotics, Internet of Things, distributed ledger, blockchain, quantum computing, virtual reality, augmented reality, real time language translators, natural language processing. It is also going to promote digital governance, which will enable ease of access to government and other public utility services, delivery of public services through online and mobile platforms in a simple, accessible, interoperable, and citizen friendly manner. Then, online safety and trust have emerged as one of the most important factors denting the credibility of internet, which have resulted in user harm taking various forms particularly unique to internet. For example, Seattle public schools sue social media companies for allegedly harming students' mental health. As US Supreme Court weighs YouTube's algorithms, litigation minefield looms. AI porn is easy to make now. For women, that's a nightmare. Gaslighting, love bombing, and narcissism. Why is Microsoft's Bing chatbot so unhinged? And so, the Digital India Act is going to adjudicate user harm against revenge porn, cyber flashing, dark web, women and children, defamation, cyberbullying, doxing, and salami slicing. It will also provide age gating so that minors cannot have access or have very regulated access to addictive technology. Safety and privacy of children on social media platforms, gaming, and betting apps. Mandatory do not track requirement to avoid children as data subjects for ad targeting. Digital user rights, which will include right to be forgotten, right to secured internet, right to secured electronic means, right to redressal, right to digital inheritance, right against discrimination, rights against automated decision making. Discretionary moderation of fake news by social media platforms should be critically examined and regulated under the constitutional rights of freedom and speech of expression. Another component of online safety and trust involves defining and regulating high risk artificial intelligence systems through legal, institutional quality testing framework to examine regulatory models, algorithmic accountability, zero day threat, and vulnerability assessment, examining artificial intelligence based ad targeting and content moderation. It will also enable privacy invasive devices such as spy camera glasses, wearable tech, which should be mandated under stringent regulation before market entry with strict know your customer requirements for retail sales with appropriate criminal law sanctions. It is also going to enable secure cyberspace by empowering agencies like CERT-In for cyber resilience, strengthening the penalty framework for non-compliance, advisories on the information and data security practices. Content monetization rules for platform generated and user generated content will also be provided for in this particular act. And finally, we need accountable internet where the need is to create responsible and ethical use of online technology. And so if you look at these headlines which we have already seen, this calls for strong regulation and accountability. And so this particular act is going to provide adjudicatory and appellate mechanisms for accountable and responsive digital operators, updated intermediary framework, obligations on significant digital operators through classification and mandates, algorithmic transparency, and periodic risk assessments by digital entities. Accountability for upholding constitutional rights of the citizens, especially Article 14, 19, and 21. Ethical use of AI based tools to protect rights or choices of users, provision of deterrence, effective, proportionate, and dissuasive penalties. Whole of government response for a unified, coordinated, and efficient and responsive governance architecture, including an effective, appropriate government structure, a dedicated inquiry agency, and a specialized dispute resolution adjudication framework. Because oftentimes the response of the government is in silos. One department responds, whereas other departments have no say or they are not bothered. And so we need a whole of government response. This particular act is also going to enforce disclosure norms for data collected by data intermediaries collecting data and above a certain threshold. Standards for ownership of anonymized personal data collected by data intermediaries. Soon, net zero waste must for buildings. So, ensuring net zero waste and treating liquid discharge will soon be made mandatory for new housing societies and commercial complexes in the country as part of Union Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry's push for reforming and modernizing the sewage disposal system. Now, from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination, this is a very important topic. In prelims examination, we could be expected to know what net zero waste means, and in mains examination, we could be expected to demonstrate the importance of net zero waste in overall pollution management. So, what is the concept of net zero waste? So, according to India's Green Building Council, a net zero waste for building and built environment is one which estimates the diversion of waste sent to landfills by a multi-pronged approach, nature-centric design, reducing debris during construction, responsibly handling waste during operation, reusing the waste as much as possible, and recycling the remaining waste. A building or a built environment has to demonstrate that the total quality of waste generated during construction and operation is equal to the quantity of waste reused within the premises and the quantity of waste recycled, so that the net quantity of waste sent to landfill is zero. Let us understand this graphically. Quantity of waste to the landfill should be equal to quantity of waste generated minus quantity of waste reused and quantity of waste recycled. So quantity of waste sent to landfill should be zero, which means that if quantity of waste generated is, let's say, 100 tons, then quantity of waste reused and quantity of waste recycled should in combination be also 100 ton, so that none of the waste is taken outside the location. And so this is a very, very important step in order to free the cities from the increasing menace of dumps. And the policy which has been adopted in order to minimize the waste is reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reduce basically means effort should be made to reduce the waste generation to the maximum extent possible in all the three stages of construction of buildings. Reuse obviously means various options for reusing the waste as a resource within the building that can be explored. Recycling is the remaining waste need to be responsibly handled and handed over to authorized recyclers for recycling or disposed in an environment friendly manner, which is then, now this obviously requires modification of design, construction and operation, which will then enable holistic approach to net zero waste. Some of the key benefits of adopting net zero waste rating, and because of which the government has come up with net zero waste rating system. And the key benefits of such a rating system would be increased use of green products and materials, thereby improving resource efficiency and health benefits, reduction in material consumption and thereby reduction in cost of construction, increasing in reuse of waste resulting in reduction in procurement of additional materials, reduction in cost associated with waste handling and disposal, opportunity to convert waste to energy or other value-added products, and brand image of being environmentally conscious are some of the benefits that we can think of while going the net zero waste rating system. Has appeared on editorial page. So recent multiple indicators survey of the government has called into question the central government's claim in 2019 that all Indian villages are open defecation free or ODFs. As of now, 4 government survey reports released just before or after the announcement, including the latest multiple indicators survey, have not only disputed the ODF status of most states, but also shown persisting levels of poor sanitation in many of them. The 3 older surveys which disputed the ODF status were the National Statistical Office NSO Survey 2018, the National Annual Rural Sanitation Survey or NARSS 2019-20, and National Family Health Survey NFHS 5. And if you are wondering how is this pertinent for UPSC, if you look at GS Paper 2 syllabus, welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of population and performance of these schemes is a part of its syllabus. Apart from that, issues relating to development and management of social sector, relating to health, education and human resources is also a part of its syllabus. And clean water and sanitation is something which gets covered in both these lines of the syllabus. And so to begin with, at the very basic, you could be expected to know what open defecation free means. It means an area which is notified or declared as ODF if at any point of the day not a single person is found defecating in the open. So the government officials visit a village and they conduct a survey where they find out that there was no one openly defecating. That particular area will be notified as ODF or open defecation free. But then there is something which is known as ODF plus as well, which is an area which is notified as ODF under Swachh Bharat mission. But apart from that, all community and public toilets are functional and well maintained. So not only no one should be found openly defecating, but all the public amenities relating to sanitation should be functional and well maintained. But then you also have a concept of ODF plus plus, which obviously includes ODF, no person found openly defecating, which includes ODF plus, all the public toilets and urinals functional and well maintained. But apart from that, it also means that there should be no discharge or dump of untreated fecal sludge or septage and sewage in drains, water bodies or open areas. And so you can see that when it comes to sanitation, ODF++ is what we are aiming for, or what we should ideally have in almost all the villages and cities. Not only there should be no person openly defecating, all the public toilets should be functional, but also all the water or sludge should be treated before going and meeting the water bodies. But clearly we are not able to achieve that, as is clearly reflected in 3 consecutive surveys. And so, what are the hindrances or the challenges which Swachh Bharat mission is facing? First and foremost, we should understand that maintaining ODF status is important after a village, block, or district is declared ODF. Generally, it so happens that once it is declared, there is no pressure on the district administration to do any activity because the goal has already been achieved. Apart from that, there is more focus on quantity. There is overemphasis on number of toilets being constructed, but there is very less focus on whether they are being maintained or not. Apart from that, there are instances of over-reporting of number of toilets being constructed as highlighted by CAG in its report. You also have contradictory claims of government and various other agencies regarding status of ODF in various villages. There is also an issue of monitoring, as government's own data have revealed only 14% of the constructed toilets have gone through the second round of verification. Then usage related challenges, which includes tackling cultural and mindset issues, providing water in rural areas, addressing the problem of small and dingy toilets, stigma associated with pit emptying, and making men use toilets. Also, despite a ban on manual scavenging, it continues at various places in the country. Unofficial figures reveal presence of 13 lakh manual scavengers. Official figures are about 2 lakhs. The Dalit community is mainly engaged in this work and not much attention is being paid towards reforming their lives. Then, sewage treatment remains below the intended levels. Untreated sewage in turn becomes an environmental hazard. Availability of water is also one of the crucial areas for continued utilization of the toilets. Regular supply of water remains a challenge and thus causes discontinuation of the use of toilets. Apart from that, caste and religious beliefs still play a crucial role in deciding who is going to use the toilets and who will not. It also has an intricate relation in terms of bringing behavioral changes. Thus, as a result, still a large number of people still prefer open defecation despite having a operational toilet.